Hey everyone, ready to dive into something that might just make you think twice about those everyday bumps and knocks we all get.
I'm excited.
Yeah, this is a good one. We're talking head impacts, and not just the big ones, the knockout concussions.
Right.
The kind, you kind of go, ouch, and then you shake it off.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're just now starting to figure out that those little hits that you just kind of brush off, they could be adding up to something bigger, something a lot bigger.
Yeah, and that's what caught my eye with this article from the University of Rochester Medical Center.
Okay.
They're launching this huge study, and they're calling it the silent danger of repeated head impacts. So think about it. We're talking football tackles, soccer headers, even like a foul tip in baseball.
Oh, yeah, things we see all the time.
All the time.
Yeah,
And you don't think twice about them.
don't think twice.
But what if those impacts, especially over and over again, are causing damage that we don't even realize?
Yeah, that's a little unsettling.
It is unsettling. The article mentioned some pretty serious potential consequences, like, problems with balance, even having trouble making decisions. It's almost like a slow burn, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. We've gotten pretty good at recognizing concussions and treating those.
Right.
But what about these smaller hits, the kind of cumulative effects of those? That's a real mystery.
And it's not just athletes, is it?
Yeah.
When you think about soldiers, construction workers,
Right.
even just everyday people that have had maybe a few too many spills in their life.
You're right. That's a huge portion of the population.
Huge.
Yeah. And that's what makes this study so important. They're trying to get a grasp on how widespread this is and what the long-term effects could be.
Okay, so let's get into the study. What are they actually doing to try to investigate this silent danger?
So first of all, the scope of this is really impressive. They're following college football and soccer players for a whole season.
Wow.
And they're tracking every single head impact. And to do that, they're using these high-tech mouthguard sensors.
Yeah.
They capture a ton of data. How many hits, the force, the direction of the impact, all that.
That's a lot of data, but how do they actually measure the damage? I mean, you can't see a brain injury, right?
Right. Well, that's where the blood tests come in.
Okay.
They're looking at certain brain proteins like GFP and UCHL1, and they test before and after games.
What are those proteins?
So think of them like a smoke alarm for the brain.
Okay.
When there's any damage, even if it's microscopic, the level of these proteins in the blood goes up.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're combining the data from the sensors with the blood test.
Yeah.
It's like a two-pronged approach.
Yeah, exactly. But there's more. They're also doing all these pre- and post-game tests, like subtle neurological things that you wouldn't find on a normal exam.
Oh, like what?
So one of them, they measure how fast your eyelid closes in response to like a puff of air.
Really? How does that tell you about brain function?
It's a subtle indicator of how well your brain is processing information, how quickly it can send signals to your muscles.
Yeah.
So even a small delay could mean something's off.
Interesting.
They're also looking at hand-eye coordination, balance, how well your eyes can track a moving object, all kinds of things.
So it's way beyond, like, are you dizzy?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They're trying to catch these tiny deficits that the athlete might not even realize are there.
Okay, that's all fascinating, but how do they know if these little abnormalities are linked to brain damage? I mean, are they doing brain scans?
This is where things get really interesting. They're using this technique called optical coherence tomography, OCT. It's basically a window into the brain, but it's non-invasive.
Okay, intrigued, but I'm not familiar with OCT.
It's like a super detailed eye exam.
Okay.
They use light to create these images of the back of your eye, your retina, the optic nerve, all that.
So they're literally looking at the eye, but how does that tell them about the brain?
Well, eye is actually an extension of the brain.
Oh.
So any changes in the brain, especially after a head impact, can show up in the eye too.
So they're looking for little signs in the eye that could point to a brain injury. Is OCT a new thing?
No, not at all. You've probably had it done at your eye doctor before. It's pretty common.
Oh, wow. Had no idea.
Yeah.
So they're using this common technology to look for these tiny injuries that might not get found otherwise. That's pretty smart. But let's say they find these abnormalities in these athletes. What happens next? Is there a treatment?
That's a key part of the study. At the end of the season, they're going to take the athletes that have these silent neurological issues and divide them into two groups. One group rests for 2 weeks, which is kind of the traditional approach. The other group, they'll do daily aerobic exercise for like 20 to 30 minutes.
Wait, exercise, isn't that kind of counterintuitive? Wouldn't you want the brain to just rest if it's been injured?
Yeah, you would think so, but aerobic exercise is actually already a standard part of concussion treatment.
Oh, okay.
So they want to see if it could help with these more subtle brain injuries too.
So they're testing whether exercise can help the brain heal and recover from these hits over time.
Exactly. And they're looking at another really cool idea too. They're calling it time as treatment. Basically, they're asking, is the time between impacts just as important as the number of hits you get?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, it makes sense that if you keep getting hit over and over, that's not good.
Right.
But what if you space those hits out? How are they testing that?
Soccer ball heading machine.
Really?
Yep, they'll have people head the ball repeatedly, and then they compare those who have days off between the sessions with those who don't.
So they're trying to figure out if giving your brain a break, even if you get the same number of hits overall, can actually reduce the damage. That's really clever.
It is, and to go even further, they're doing some research at Boston Children's Hospital using animals. This is where they're asking the big question. Is there even such a thing as a safe head impact? Like, does every hit, no matter how small, cause some damage, even if we can't see it?
Wow, that's kind of a scary question.
It is, and the answer could change how we think about head safety for everything, not just sports.
I can see that. So we've got this team at Rochester looking at the problem from all sides.
Right.
They're trying to figure out how to find these hidden injuries, how to treat them, and how to prevent them in the first place.
Yeah, and they're really pushing the boundaries of how we understand what happens to the brain when it gets these seemingly minor hits.
This is really interesting stuff, and I have a feeling this research is going to change how we think about protecting our heads. But we've covered a lot, so let's take a minute to think about what we've learned, and then we'll get into what it all means.
Sounds good to me. You know what's really interesting is that this study is actually building on older research using OCT.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Dr. Bazarian, who's leading this new study, he teamed up with a retina specialist at Rochester, Dr. Silverstein,
Okay.
to look at this a while back. They used OCT to check out the retinas of football players after a whole season.
Okay.
And what they found was pretty amazing. The number of head hits these players took was directly related to changes in their retinas.
So they were seeing evidence that even hits that don't cause a full-on concussion
Yeah.
could still be like messing with the eye.
Exactly. And that's why this new study is so cool. They're taking that research and making it way bigger. They're not just looking at the eyes anymore. They're combining OCT with those mouthguard sensors, the blood tests, the neurological stuff. It's like they're putting together a puzzle.
Yeah, like a high-resolution puzzle.
Right. And speaking of putting things together, they're also looking at some really interesting treatments. We talked about how they're comparing rest with aerobic exercise to help the brain recover from these silent issues. But they're also looking at the timing of the hits, that time as treatment thing.
Right, that's fascinating to me. What if they find that spacing out the hits does actually make a difference? Like, what would that mean for real life? Could it change how we do sports or other stuff?
Totally. Think about soccer practice, for example. Right now, heading drills are just part of the routine. But imagine if this research says that giving those athletes a day or two off between heading sessions really lowers the risk of those brain changes.
Yeah.
That could change how we train athletes.
It's like we've always tried to make the hits themselves less forceful.
Right.
But maybe how often you get hit and when is just as important.
You got it. And this research could give us some real data to help us make things safer without getting rid of them completely.
It's finding that balance, right, between pushing athletes and protecting their brains for the long term.
Exactly. And it's not just sports. Think about soldiers, construction workers, even kids on a playground. If we can figure out how to space out those hits, we could be protecting them from long-term problems.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how big this could be. It could affect so many parts of life. You mentioned the animal research earlier. Tell me more about that.
Sure. The stuff they're doing at Boston Children's Hospital is trying to get at the most basic question. Is there even such a thing as a safe head impact? They're using animals to see if even the tiniest hits, the ones we don't even feel, are doing damage at the cellular level.
I bet that research is complicated, maybe even a little controversial.
Yeah, for sure. It's early, but what they're seeing is that even small hits can trigger a bunch of stuff in the brain.
Yeah.
Inflammation and other things that could lead to problems over time.
It's like we always thought the brain could kind of bounce back from those everyday bumps.
Right.
What if we're wrong about that?
That's what they're trying to figure out. If there is no safe level, if every hit matters, then we might have to change how we think about head safety in a big way.
It makes you think about things like contact sports.
Yeah.
If every hit is bad, do we have to change those sports completely?
It's a tough question, no doubt. But having this kind of research is so important. It gives us a place to start, you know? We need this knowledge so we can make good decisions. Whether it's about rules in sports, better helmets, or just making people aware of the risks, we need to be talking about this stuff.
Totally. Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the study, how they're doing it, what it might mean, and even the ethics of it all. We've covered a lot. But it feels like we're just getting started with this whole topic, you know?
I agree. It's crazy how much we're learning about the brain these days, but it also shows us how much we still don't know.
Okay, so let's talk to our listeners for a second.
Yeah.
Say someone's listening and they're thinking, this is wild. What does this mean for me? What should I do? What would you tell them?
That's a good question. I think the first thing is just being aware. Now you know about these potential risks, even from small hits, so you can make better choices about what you do and what your family does.
So being proactive, thinking about those risks, and trying to avoid them when you can.
Yeah, exactly. If your kid plays contact sports, make sure they have the right gear and they're learning to play safely. And in everyday life, there are simple things you can do too, like wearing a helmet when you bike or skateboard, even if it's a quick trip. Just be aware of your surroundings, especially if you're clumsy like me.
Yeah, I feel you on that. It's about building a culture of safety, you know, starting with ourselves and spreading it to our families and communities.
Exactly. And as this research goes on, we'll have even more info to help us make smart choices.
I love it. This has been an amazing deep dive. We've looked at this from every angle. I'm so glad you were here to share your insights.
Happy to be here. The brain is always a fun topic to talk about, even with all the mysteries.
You know, it's amazing to me how they're using the eye to spot potential brain injuries. It really shows how connected everything in our bodies is.
Yeah, it's a good point. We think about our bodies as separate parts, but really it's all one big system.
Right. And maybe there are signs of other problems hiding in plain sight, too.
Exactly. That's what makes science so cool, right? We're always finding these new connections, figuring out how things work.
This whole deep dive has really changed how I think about head bumps. I used to be like, it's fine. But now I realize those little hits could add up to something bigger later on.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that way. We tend to focus on what we can see right away, not the stuff happening on a tiny level over time.
And that's why this research is so important, right? It's showing us those hidden risks so we can protect ourselves.
Totally. It's about giving people the power to take care of their brains, to make good decisions about the risks, and how to stay safe.
So as we finish up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I think the biggest thing is this. We need to start thinking about head impacts in a new way. Even small ones can add up over time. So let's be proactive. Let's pay attention. Let's make head safety a priority for ourselves and everyone we care about.
Couldn't agree more. It's about making good choices, knowing the risks, and taking care of our brains. And who knows, maybe this is just the beginning. Maybe this research will lead to even bigger discoveries about how to keep our brains healthy. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.